Hello, everybody. How's it going? Fixing a few things. Let me know if the music audio is a little too loud. I can adjust it. All those out in Viewerland. What's goody? I know I got at least one person out there. Alright. So tonight, I've read a good deal of Jack Vance's short stories on this channel. Now we are going to be delving into a bit longer of a story called The Eyes of the Overworld. So we're going to do this in segments. I'll be reading, just chapter each Sunday. We'll read another chapter. And I'm planning on posting these on my YouTube as well. So I'll be doing that at that juncture. So hello, what's up, Lonely Race Car? Hiya, greetings, welcome to the channel again. We're gonna read this story called Eyes of the Overworld. It's another Jack Vance story, and yeah, it's really cool. Jack Vance is pretty cool. So far, he's become one of my favorite authors. I like how he combines a bit of like science fiction and fantasy together to kind of make its own sort of vibe. And the world of the dying Earth, the sun is about to go out. It hangs low in the sky. It's a dull red. No longer is it yellow. And society's just kind of falling apart. But there are... magic is real, or, well, magic is a thing, but it's got scientific explanations. But most people just consider it like just magic, because at this point society's degenerated after so many years that technology and magic is like seen as kind of the same thing. This is like post-apocalyptic. This is like end of the world kind of stuff, and that's why it's called the Dying Earth series. So anyhow, we're gonna jump right into it with The Eyes of the Overworld. Chapter 1, The Overworld. On the heights above the river Zan, at the site of a certain ancient ruins, Konu, the laughing magician, had built a manse to his private taste. An eccentric structure of steep gables, balconies, skywalks, cupolas, together with 3 spiral green glass towers, through which the red sunlight shone in twisted glints and peculiar colors. Behind the manse across the valley, low hills rolled away, like dunes to the limit of vision. The sun projected shifting crescents of black shadow. Otherwise, the hills were unmarked, empty, solitary. The Zan, rising in the old forest to the east of Almery, passed below, then 3 leagues to the west made junction with the Skaum. Here, with Asnomé, a town beyond memory, notable only for its fair, which attracted folks from all around the region. At Asnomé Fair, Cudgel had established a booth for the sale of talismans. Cudgel was a man of many capabilities, with a disposition at once flexible and pertinacious. He was of a long leg, of deft hand, light of finger, and soft of tongue. His hair was the blackest of black fur, growing low down to his forehead, coving sharply back along his eyebrows. His darting eye, long, inquisitive nose, and droll mouth gave him somewhat lean and bony face, an expression of vivacity, candor, and affability. He had known many vicissitudes, gaining therefrom a suppleness, a fine discretion, a mastery of both bravado and stealth. Coming into the possession of an ancient lead coffin, after discarding its contents, he had formed a number of leaden lozenges. These, stamped with appropriate seals and runes, he offered for sale at the Asnomay Fair. Unfortunately for Cudgel, not 20 paces from his booth, a certain Theansother had established a larger booth with articles of greater variety and more obvious efficacy, so that whenever Cudgel halted a passerby to enlarge upon the merits of his merchandise, the passerby would not like as to display an article purchased from Fiancifer and go his way. On the third day of the fair, Cudgel had disposed of only 4 periaps at prices barely above the cost of the lead itself. When Fiancother was hard to put serve all of his customers. Hoarse from bawling futile inductments, Cudgel closed down his booth and approached Fian Ostler's place of trade in order to inspect the mode of construction and the fastenings at the door. Fian Ostler, observing, beckoned him to approach. "Enter, my friend, enter. How goes your trade?" "In all candor, not too well," said Cudgel. "I am both perplexed and disappointed, for my talesmen are not obviously useless." "I can resolve your perplexity," said Fian Ostler. "Your booth occupies the site of an old gibbet, and has absorbed unlucky essences. But I thought to notice you examining the manner in which the timbers of my booth are joined. You will obtain a better view from within, but first I must shorten the chain of the captive herb which roams the premises during the night." "No need," said Cudgel. "My interest was only cursory." "As to the disappointment you suffer," Fian Ostler went on, "it need not persist. Observe these shelves. You will note that my stock is seriously depleted." Cudgel acknowledged as much. "How does this concern me?" Fian Ostler pointed across the way to a man wearing garments of black. This man was small, yellow of skin, bald as a stone. His eyes resembled knots in a plank. His mouth was wide and curved in a grin of chronic mirth. "There stands Iokonu, the laughing magician," said Fiancother. "In a short time he will come into my booth and attempt to buy a particular red librum, the casebook of Dibarchus Mayor, who studied under the great Faendal. My price is higher than he will pay, but he's a patient man and will remonstrate for at least 3 hours. During this time, his manse stands unattended. It contains a vast collection of thaumaturgical artifacts, instruments, and activants, as well as curiosa, talismans, amulets, and librams. I'm anxious to purchase such items. Need I say more?" "This is all very well," said Cudgel, "but would Iokonu leave his manse without guard or attendant?" Fian Ostler held wide his hands. "Why not? Who would dare steal from Iokonu, the laughing magician?" "Precisely my thought. It deters me," Cudgel replied. "I am a man of resource, but not in sensitive recklessness." "There is wealth to be gained," said Fian Ostler. "Dazzles and displays, marvels beyond worth, as well as charms, puissances, and elixirs. But remember, I urge nothing. I counsel nothing. If you are apprehended, you have only heard me exclaiming the wealth of Iokonu, the laughing magician. Oh, but here he comes. Quick, turn your back so that he may not see your face. 3 hours he will be here. So much I guarantee." Iokonu entered the booth, and Cudgel went to examine a bottle containing a pickled homunculus. "Greetings, Iokonu," called Fiaster. Why have you delayed? I have refused munificent offers for a certain red librum, and on your account. And here, note this casket. It was found in a crypt near the site of Old Carcod. It is yet sealed, and who knows what wonder it may contain. Oh, lost my place. My price is a modest 12,000 terces. Interesting, murmured Iukonu. The inscription. Let me see. Yes, it is authentic. The casket contains calcinized fish bone, which was used throughout Grand Mothalum as a purgative. It is worth perhaps 10 or 12 terces as a curio. I own caskets eons older, dating back to the Age of Glow. Cudgel sauntered to the door, gained the street, where he paced back and forth, considering every detail of the proposal as explicated by Van Oster. Superficially, the matter seemed reasonable. Here was Iukonu. There was the manse, bulging with encompassed wealth. Certainly no harm could result from simple reconnaissance. Cudgel set along eastward along the banks of Zan. Twisted turrets of green glass rose against the dark blue sky, scarlet sunlight engaging itself in the volutes. Cudgel paused, and made a careful appraisal of the countryside. The Zan flowed past without a sound. Nearby, half concealed among the black poplars, pale green larch, drooping Paul willow, was a village. A dozen stone huts inhabited by bargemen, and tillers of river terraces, folk engrossed in their own concerns. Cudgel studied the approach of the manse, a winding way paved with dark brown tile. Finally, he decided that the more frank his approach, the less complex be his explanations. If such were demanded, he began to climb up the hillside, and Iokonu's manse reared upon him. Gaining the courtyard, he paused to search the landscape. Along the river hills rolled away into the dimness, as far as the eye could reach. Cudgel marched briskly to the door, rapped, but evoked no response. He considered. If Iukonu, like Fianosther, maintained a guardian beast, it might be tempted to utter a sound if provoked. Cudgel called out in various tones, growling, mewing, yammering. Silence within. He walked gingerly to a window and peered into a hall draped in pale gray, containing only a taboret on which, under a glass bell jar, lay a dead rodent. Cudgel circled the manse, investigating each window. As he came to it, and finally reached the great hall of the ancient castle, nimbly he climbed through the rough stones and leapt across one of Iukonu's fanciful parapets. And in a thrice, he had gained access to the manse. He stood in a bedchamber. On a dais, 6 gargoyles supporting a couch turned heads to glare at the intrusion. With 2 stealthy strides, Cudgel gained the arch, which opened into an outer chamber. Here, the walls were green, and the furnishings black and pink. He left the room for a balcony, circling a central chamber, light streaming through the oriels high in the walls. Below, there were cases, chests, shelves, and racks containing all manner of objects. Iukonu's marvelous collection. Cudgel stood poised, tense as a bird, but the quality of the silence reassured him. The silence of an empty place. Still, he trespassed upon the property of Iukonu, the laughing magician, and vigilance was appropriate. Cudgel strode down a sweep of circular stairs into the great hall. He stood enthralled, paying Iukonu the tribute of unstinted wonder. But his time was limited. He must rob swiftly and be on his way. Out came his sack. He roved the hall fastidiously, selecting those objects of small bulk and great value. A small pot with antlers, which emitted clouds of remarkable gases when the prongs were tweaks. An ivory horn which sounded voices of the past. A small stage where costumed imps stood ready to perform comic antics. An object like a cluster of crystal grapes, each affording a blurred view into one of the demon worlds. A baton sprouting sweet meats of assorted flavor. An ancient ring engraved with runes. A black stone surrounded by 9 zones of impalpable color. He passed by hundreds of jars of powders and liquids, likewise forebode from the vessels containing preserved heads. Now he came to the shelves, stacked with volumes, folios, and librams, where he selected with care, taking for preference those bound in purple velvet, Feindal's characteristic color. He likewise selected folios of drawings and ancient maps, and the disturbed leather exuded a musty odor. He circled back to the front of the hall, past a case of displaying a score of metal chests, sealed with corroded bands of great age. Cudgel selected 3 at random. They were unwanted heavy. He passed by several massive engines, whose purpose he would have liked to explore, but time was advancing. And best he should be on his way, back to Azenome and the booth of Fianother. Fianother would hardly choose to pay full value for his goods, or more accurately, Iukonu's goods. It might be well to bury a certain portion of the loot in an isolated place. Here was an alcove that Cudgel had previously noted. A soft light welled like water against the crystal pane, which separated alcove from hall. A niche to the rear displayed a complicated object of great charm. As best Cudgel could distinguish, it seemed to be a miniature carousel on which rode a dozen beautiful dolls of seeming vitality. The object was clearly of great value, and Cudgel was pleased to find an aperture in the crystal pane. He stepped through, but 2 feet before him, a second pane blocked his way, establishing an avenue which evidently led to the magic whirligig. Cudgel proceeded confidently, only to be stopped by another pane, which he had not seen until he bumped into it. Cudgel retraced his steps, and to his gratification found the doubtlessly correct entrance a few feet back. But this new avenue led him by several right angles to another blank pane. Cudgel decided to forego the acquisition of the carousel and depart the castle. He turned, but discovered himself to be a trifle confused. He had come from his left, or was it his right? Cudgel was seeking egress when in due course, Iukonu returned to his manse. Pausing by the alcove, Iukonu gave Cudgel a stare of humorous astonishment. "Well, what have we here? A visitor? And I have been so remiss as to keep you waiting. Still, I see you have amused yourself, and I feel no mortification." Iukonu permitted a chuckle to escape his lips. Then he pretended to notice Cudgel's bag. "What is this? You have brought objects for my examination? Excellent. I am always anxious to enhance my collection, in order to keep this pace with the attrition of the years. You would be astounded to learn of what rogues would seek to despoil me. That merchant of claptrap, in his tawdry little booth, for instance. You could not conceive his frantic efforts in that regard. I tolerate him because, to date, he has not been bold enough to venture himself into my manse. But come, step out here into the hall, and we will examine the contents of your bag. He's caught. Got him. Let's see. Cudgel bowed graciously. Gladly, as you assume. I have indeed been waiting for your return. If I recall correctly, the exit is by the passage. He stepped forward, but halted again. He made a gesture of rueful amusement. I seem to have taken a wrong turning. Apparently so, said Iukono. Glancing upward, you will notice a decorative motif upon the ceiling. If you heed the flexion of those luneals, you will be guided to the hall. Iukono made a suave gesture. If you will step this way, I will be glad to examine your merchandise. Cudgel glanced reflectively along the corridor towards the front entrance. It would be a presumption upon your patience. My little knickknacks are below notice. With your permission, I will take my leave. By no means, declared Iukono heartily. I have few visitors, most of whom are rogues and thieves. I handle them severely, I assure you. I insist that you at least take some refreshment. Place your bag on the floor. Cudgel carefully set down the bag. Recently I was instructed with a small competence by a sea hag of white Ulster. I believe you will be interested. I require several ells of stout cord. You excite my curiosity. Iukono extended his arm. A panel to the wainscoting slid back, and a coil of rope was tossed into his hand. Rubbing his face as if to conceal a smile, Iukono handed the rope to Cudgel, who shook it out with great care. I will ask your cooperation, said Cudgel. A small matter of extending one arm and one leg. Yes, of course. Iukono held out his hand, pointed a finger. The rope coiled around Cudgel's arms and legs, pinning him so that he was unable to move. Iukono's grin nearly split his great soft head. This is a surprising development. By error, I recall fourth thief-taker. For your own comfort, do not strain, as thief-taker is woven of wasp legs. Now then, I will examine the contents of your bag. He peered into Cudgel's sack and emitted a soft cry of dismay. Oh, you have rifled my collection. I note certain of my most valuable treasures. Cudgel grimaced. Naturally, but I am no thief. Beyonce sent me here to collect certain objects, and therefore, Iukono held up his hand. The offense is far too serious for flippant disclaimers. I have stated my abhorrence for plunderers and thieves. And now, I must visit upon you justice in its most unmitigated. Unless, of course, you can suggest an adequate requital. Some such requital surely exists, Cudgel averred. This cord, however, rasps upon my skin, so I find that cognition impossible. No matter, I have decided to apply the charm of forlorn insistment, which constricts the subject in a pore some 45 miles below the surface of the earth. Cudgel blinked in dismay. Under these conditions, requital would never be made. True, mused Iukono. I wonder if, after all, there is some small service which you could perform for me. The villain is as good as dead, declared Cudgel. Now remove these abominable bands. no specific assassination in mind, said Iukono. Come. The rope relaxed, allowing Cudgel to hobble after Iukono into a side chamber hung with intricately embroidered tapestry. From a cabinet, Iukono brought a small case and laid it on a floating disc of glass. He opened the case and gestured to Cudgel, who perceived that the box showed 2 indentations lined with scarlet fur, where reposed a single small hemisphere of filmed violet glass. As a knowledgeable and traveled man, suggested Iukono, you doubtless recognize this object, no? You are familiar, of course, with the Cuts Wars of the 18th Aeon? No? Iukono hunched up his shoulders in astonishment. During these ferocious events, the demon Underrada, he is listed as 1604, green in Thrump's almanac, though to assist his principles, and to his end thrust certain agencies up from the sub-world of La in order that they might perceive. They were tipped with cusps of similar to this one that you see before you. When events went amiss, the demon snatched himself back to La The hemispheres were dislodged and broadcast across cusps. One of these, as you see, I own. You must procure its mate and bring it to me, whereupon your trespass will be overlooked. Cudgel reflected. The choice, if it lies between a sortie into the demon world of La and the spell of forlorn insistment, it's moot. Frankly, I am at a loss for a decision. Iukonu's laugh almost split the big yellow bladder of his head. A visit to La perhaps will prove unnecessary. You may secure the article in that land known as Cuts. If I must, I must, growled Cudgel, thoroughly displeased by the manner in which the day's work had ended. Who guards this violet hemisphere, and what is its function? How do I go, and how do I return? With what necessary weapons, talismans, and other magical adjuncts do you undertake me to fit me out? All in good time, said Iukono. First, I must ensure that once at liberty, you conduct yourself with unremitting loyalty, zeal, and singleness of purpose. Have no fear, declared Cudgel. My word is my bond. Excellent, cried Iukono. This knowledge represents a basic security which I do not in the least take lightly. The act now to be performed is doubtless supererogatory. He departed the chamber and after a moment returned with a covered glass bowl containing a small white creature, all claws, prongs and barbs, and hooks, squirming angrily. This, said Iukono, is my friend Ferks, from the star Aknar, who is far wiser than he seems. Ferks is annoyed at being separated from his comrade, with whom he shares a vat in my workroom. He will assist you in your expeditious discharge of your duties. Iukono stepped close, deftly thrust out the creature against Cudgel's abdomen. It merged into his viscera and took up a vigilant post clasped around Cudgel's liver. Iukono stood back, laughing at the immoderate glee which had earned him his cognomen. Cudgel's eyes bulged from his head. He had opened his mouth to utter an objurgation, but instead clenched his jaw and rolled up his eyes. The rope uncoiled itself. Cudgel stood quivering, every muscle knotted. Iukonu's mirth dwindled to a thoughtful grin. You spoke of magical adjuncts. What of those talesmen whose efficacy you proclaimed from your booth of As-no-me? Will they not immobilize enemies, dissolve iron, impassion virgins, confer immortality? These talismans are not uniformly dependable, said Cudgel. I will require further competences. You have them, said Iukonu, in your sword, your crafty persuasiveness, and the agility at your feet. Still, you have aroused my concern, and I will hold you to this extent. He hung a small square tablet around Cudgel's neck. You may now put aside all fear for starvation. A touch of this potent object will induce nutriment into the wood. Bark, grass, even discarded clothing, it will also sound a chime in the presence of poison. So then, there is nothing to delay us. Come, we will go. Rope? Where's the rope? Obediently, the rope looped around Cudgel's neck, and Cudgel was forced to march behind Iukonu. They came out upon the roof of an antique castle. Darkness had long since fallen over the land. Where was I? I completely lost my place. Let me get back to it. Okay, here we go. They came out upon a roof of the antique castle. Darkness had long since followed over the land. Up and down the valley of Zan, faint lights glimmered, while the Zan itself was an irregular width darker than dark. Iukonu pointed to a cage. This will be your conveyance. Inside. Cudgel hesitated. It might be preferable to dine well, to sleep in, rest, and to set forth tomorrow refreshed. What? Spoke Iukonu in a voice like a horn. You dare stand before me and state preferences? You who came skulking into my house, pillaged my valuables, and left all in disarray? Do you understand your luck? Perhaps you prefer the forlorn insistment? By no means, protested Cudgel nervously. I am anxious only for the success of the venture. Into the cage, then. Cudgel turned despairing eyes around the castle roof, then slowly went to the cage and stepped within. I trust you suffer no deficiency of memory, said Iukonu. But even if this becomes the case, if you neglect your prime responsibility, which is to say, the procuring of the violet cusp, Perks is on hand to remind you. Cudgel said, Since I am now committed to this enterprise and unlikely to return, you may care to learn my appraisal of yourself and your character. In the first place. But Iukonu held up his hand. I do not care to listen. Obloquy. Injuries to my self-esteem, and I am skeptical of praise. Now be off. He drew back, stared up into the darkness, then shouted that invocation, known as Thasdrubal's logonetic transfer. From high came a thud, and a buffet, and a muffled bellow of rage. Iukonu retreated a few steps, shouting up words in an archaic language, and the cage, with Cudgel crouching within, was snatched aloft and hurled through the air. cold wind bit Cudgel's face. From above came a flapping and a creaking of vast wings and a dismal lamentation. The cage swung back and forth. Below, all was dark, like a blackness, a pit. By the disposition of the stars, Cudgel perceived that the course was to the north, and presently he sensed the thrust of the Morennan Mountains below, and they flew over the wilderness known as the Land of the Falling Wall. Once or twice Cudgel glimpsed the lights of an isolated castle wall. And once he noted a great bonfire. For a period, a winged sprite came to fly alongside the cage and peer within. It seemed to find Cudgel's plight amusing, and when Cudgel sought information as to the land below, it merely uttered a raucous cry of mirth. It became fatigued and sought to cling to the cage, but Cudgel kicked it away, and it fell into the wind with a scream of envy. The east flushed the red of the old blood, and presently the sun appeared, trembling like an old man with a chill. The ground was shrouded by mist. Cudgel was barely able to see that they crossed a land of black mountains and dark chasms. Presently, the mist parted once more to reveal a leaden sea. Once or twice he peered up, but the roof of the cage concealed the demon, except for the tips of the leathern wings. At last the demon reached the north shore of the ocean, swooping to a beach. It vented a vindictive croak and allowed the cage to fall from a height of 15 feet. Cudgel crawled from the broken cage, nursing his bruises. He called a curse after the departing demon, then plodded back through the sand and the dank yellow spinifex, and climbed the slope of the foreshore. To the north there were marshy barrens and a far huddle of low hills. To the east and west, ocean and dreary beach. Cudgel shook his fist to the south. Somehow, at some time, in some manner, he would visit revenge upon the laughing magician. So much he vowed. A few hundred yards to the west was the trace of an ancient sea wall. Cudgel thought to inspect it, but hardly moved 3 steps before Ferks clamped prongs into his liver. Cudgel, rolling his eyes up in agony, reversed his direction and set out along the shore to the east. Presently, he hungered, and besought himself of the charm furnished by Eukonu. He picked up a piece of driftwood and rubbed it with the tablet, hoping to see a transformation into a tray of sweet meats or a roast fowl. But the driftwood merely softened to the texture of cheese, retaining the flavor of driftwood. A Cudgel ate with snaps and gulps. Another score against Eukonu. How the laughing magician would pay. The scarlet globe of the sun slid across the southern sky. Night approached, and at last Cudgel came upon his human habitation. A rude village beside a small river. The huts were like birds, nests of mud and sticks, and smelled vilely of ordure and filth. Among them wandered a people as unlovely and graceless as the huts. They were squat, brutish, and obese. Their hair was coarse yellow and tangled. Their features were lumps. Their single noteworthy attribute, one which Cudgel took an instant and keen interest, was their eyes. Blind-seeming violet hemispheres, similar in every aspect to the object that required by Eukonu. Cudgel approached the village cautiously, but the inhabitants took small interest in him. If the hemisphere coveted by Iukonu were identical to the violet eyes of these folk, then a basic uncertainty of the mission was resolved, and procuring the violet cusp became merely a matter of tactics. Cudgel paused to observe the villagers and found much to puzzle him. In the first place, they carried themselves not as the ill-smelling loons that they were, but there was a remarkable loftiness and a dignity which verged at times upon hauteur. Cudgel watched in puzzlement. Were they a tribe of dotards? In any event, they seemed to pose no threat, and he advanced into the main avenue of the village. Walking gingerly to avoid the more noxious heaps of refuse, one of the villagers now deigned to notice him, and addressed him in a grunting, guttural voice.
"Well, sirrah, what is your wish? Why do you prowl on the outskirts of our city, Small Odd?"
"I am a wayfarer," said Cudgel. "I ask only to be directed to the inn, where I might find food and lodging."
"We have no inn. Travelers and wayfarers are unknown to us. Still, you are welcome to stay and share our plenty. Yonder is a manse, with appointments sufficient to your comfort."
The man pointed to a dilapidated hut.
"You may eat as you will. Merely enter the refectory yonder, and select what you wish. There is no stinting at Small Odd."
"I thank you gratefully," said Cudgel, and would have spoken further, except his host had strolled away. Cudgel gingerly looked into the shed, and after some exertion, cleaned out the most inconvenient debris, and arranged a trestle on which to sleep. The sun was now at the horizon, and Cudgel went to the storeroom, which had been identified as the refractory. The villager's description of the bounty available, as Cudgel had suspected, was in the nature of hyperbole. To one side of the storeroom was a heap of smoked fish. To the other, a bin containing lentils mingled with various seeds and cereals. Cudgel took a portion to his hut, where he made a glum supper. The sun had set. Cudgel went forth to see that the village offered what in the way of entertainment, but found the streets to be deserted. In certain of the huts, lamps burned, and Cudgel, peering through the cracks, saw the residents dining upon smoked fish, or engaged in discourse. He returned to his shed, built a small fire against the chill, and composed himself for sleep. The following day, Cudgel renewed his observation of the village and its violet-eyed folk. None, he noticed, went forth to work, nor did there seem to be fields near at hand. The discovery caused Cudgel dissatisfaction. In order to secure one of the violet eyes, he would be obliged to kill its owner, and for this purpose, freedom from his officious interference was essential. He made tentative attempts at conversation among the villagers, but they looked at him in a manner which presently began to jar at Cudgel's equanimity, and it was almost as if they were gracious lords, and he the ill-smelling lout. During the afternoon, he strolled south, and about a mile along the shore came upon another village. The people were much like the inhabitants of Small Odd, but with ordinary seeming eyes. They were likewise industrious. Cudgel watched them till the fields and fished the ocean. He approached a pair of fishermen on their way back to the village. their catch slung over their shoulders. No, it's not. They stopped, eyeing Cudgel with no great friendliness. Cudgel introduced himself as a wayfarer and asked concerning the lands to the east. But the fisherman professed ignorance, other than the fact that the land was barren, dreary, and dangerous. "I am currently a village guest at Smallod," said Cudgel. "I find the folk pleasant enough, but somewhat odd. For instance, why are their eyes as they are? What is the nature of their affliction?" "Why do they conduct themselves with such aristocratic self-assuredness and suavity of manner?" "The eyes are magic cusps," stated the older fisherman in a grudging voice. "They afford a view of the overworld. Why should not the owners behave as lords? So will I when Radcastavaman dies, for I inherit his eyes." "Indeed," exclaimed Cudgel marvelingly. "Can these magic cusps be detached at will and transferred as the owner sees fit?" "They can, but who would exchange the overworld for this?" The fisherman swung his arm around the dreary landscape. "I have toiled long, and at last it is my turn to taste the delights of the overworld. After this there is nothing, and the only peril is death through a surfeit of bliss." "Vastly interesting," remarked Cudgel. "How might I qualify for a pair of these magic cusps?" "Strive as all do, under the others of Graz. Place your name on the list, then toil to supply the lords of Smallod with sustenance. 31 years have I sown and reaped lentils and emmer, and netted fish and dried them over the slow fires. And now the name of Bubak Ankh is at the head of the list, and you must do the same." 31 years, mused Cudgel. "A period of not negligible duration." And Ferks squirmed restlessly, causing Cudgel's liver no small discomfort. The fishermen proceeded to their village, Graz. Cudgel returned to Smallod. Here he sought out the man whom he had spoken upon his arrival in the village. "My lord," said Cudgel, "as you know, I am a traveler from a far land, attracted here by the magnificent city of Smallod."
Understandable, grunted the other. Our splendor cannot help but inspire emulation.
"What then is the source of the magic of the cusps?" The elder turned the violet hemispheres upon Cudgel as if seeing him for the first time. He spoke in a surly voice.
"It is a matter we do not care to dwell upon, but there is no harm in it. Now that the subject has been broached, at a remote time, the demon Underherd sent up tentacles to look across Earth, each tipped with a cusp. Symbilus the 16th pained the monster, which jerked back to his subworld, and the cusps became dislodged. 412 of the cusps were gathered and brought to Smallod. Then, as splendid as it now appears to me, yes, I realize that I see but a semblance, but so do you. And who is to say which is real?
I do not look through magic cusps, said Cudgel.
True, the elder shrugged. It is a matter I prefer to overlook. I dimly recall that I inhabit a sty and devour the coarsest of food. But the subjective reality is that I inhabit a glorious palace, and I dine on splendid viands among princes and princesses who are my peers. It is explained thus. The demon Underherd looked from the subworld to this one. We look from this to the Overworld, which is the quintessence of human hope, visionary longing, and beatific dream. We who inhabit this world, how can we think of ourselves as other than splendid lords? This is how we are.
It is inspiring, exclaimed Cudgel. How may I obtain a pair of these magic cusps?
There are two methods. Underherd lost 414 cusps. We control 412. 2 were never found, and evidently lie on the floor of the ocean's deep. You are at liberty to secure these. The second means is to become a citizen of Graz and furnish the lords of Smallod with sustenance until one of us dies, as we do infrequently.
I understand that a certain Lord Radkuth Vaughman is ailing.
Yes, that is he.
The elder indicated a pot-bellied old man with a slack, drooling mouth, sitting in filth before his hut.
You see him at his ease, in the pleasance of his palace. Lord Radcuth strained himself with a surfeit of lust. For our princesses are the most ravishing creations of human inspiration, just as I am the noblest of princes. But Lord Radcuth indulges himself too copiously, and therefore suffered a mortification. It is a lesson for us all.
Perhaps I might make special arrangements to secure his cusps, ventured Cudgel.
I fear not. You must go to Graz and toil as the others do. As did I in a former existence, which now seems dim and inchoate. To think I suffered so long ago. But you are young, 30 or 40 or 50 years. It is not a long time to wait.
Cudgel put his hand to his abdomen to quiet the fretful stirring of Perks. In the space of so much time, the sun may well have waned. Look! He pointed as a black flicker crossed the face of the sun and seemed to leave a momentary crust. Even now it ebbs.
You are over-apprehensive, stated the elder. To us who are lords of Smallod, the sun puts forth a radiance of exquisite color.
This may be well true at the moment, said Cudgel, but when the sun goes dark, what then? Will you take an equal delight in the gloom and the chill? But the elder no longer attended him. Radkuth Vaughman had fallen sideways into the mud and appeared to be dead, toying indecisively with his knife. Cudgel went to look down at the corpse. A deft cut or two, no more than the work of a moment, and he would have achieved his goal. He swayed forward, but already the fugitive moment had passed. Other lords of the village had approached to jostle Cudgel aside. Radkuth Vaughman was lifted and carried with the most solemn nicety into the ill-smelling precincts of his hut. Cudgel stared wistfully through the doorway, calculating the chances of this ruse and that.
"Let lamps be brought," intoned the elder. "Let a final effulgence surround Lord Radcouth on his gem-encrusted bier. Let the golden clarion sound from the towers. Let the princesses don robes of samite. Let their tresses obscure the faces of delight Lord Radcouth loved so well. And now we must keep vigil. Who will guard the bier?"
Cudgel stepped forward. "I would deem it an honor indeed." The elder shook his head.
"This is a privilege reserved for his peers. Lord Malphag, Lord Gluss, perhaps you will act in this capacity."
Two of the villagers approached the bench which Lord Radcouth Vaughn lay.
"Next," declared the elder, "the obsequies must be proclaimed, and the magic cusps transferred to Bubak Ang, that most deserving squire of Graz, who again will notify the squire."
"Again," said Cudgel, "I offer my services, if only to requite some small manner of the hospitality I've enjoyed here in Smallod."
"Well spoken," intoned the elder. "So then, at speed to Graz. Return with that squire who, by his faith and dutiful toils, deserves an advancement."
Cudgel bowed and ran off across the barrens towards Grod. As he approached the outermost fields, he moved cautiously, skulking from tussock to corpse, and presently found that which he sought: a peasant turning the dank soil with a mattock. Cudgel crept quietly forward and struck down the loon with a gnarled root. He stripped off the bast garments, the leather hat, the leggings, and the footgear with his knife. He hacked off the stiff, straw-colored beard. Taking all and leaving the peasant lying dazed and naked in the mud, he fled on long strides back toward Smallod. In a secluded spot, he dressed himself in the stolen garments. He examined the hacked-off beard with some perplexity, and finally, by tying up tufts of coarse yellow hair and tying tuft to tuft, contrived to bind enough together to make a straggling false beard for himself. That hair which remained he tucked up under the brim of the flapping leather hat. Now the sun had set, plum-colored gloom obscured the land. Cudgel returned to Smallod. Oil lamps flickered before the hut of Radcouth, where the obese, misshapen village women wailed and groaned. Cudgel stepped cautiously forward, wondering what might be expected of him. As for his disguise, it would either prove effective or would not. To what extent the violet cusps befuddled perception was a matter of doubt. He could only hazard a trial. Cudgel marched boldly up to the door of the hut. Pitching his voice as low as possible, he called,
"I am here, revered princes of Smallod."
Squire Bubak Ang of Graz,
who for this 31 years had heaped the choices of delicacies into the Smallod larders. Now I appear as beseeching elevation to your station of nobility. "As is your right," said the chief elder, "but you seem a man different from that Bubak Ang, who so long ago has served the princes of Smallod. I have been transfigured through grief at the passing of Prince Radcouth Vaughn, and through rapture at the prospect of elevation." This is clear and understandable. Come then, prepare yourself for the rites."
I am ready as of this instance, said Cudgel. Indeed, if you will but tender me with the magic cusps, I will take them quietly aside and rejoice. The chief elder shook his head indulgently.
This is not according to the rites. To begin with, you must stand naked, here on the pavilion of this mighty castle, and the fairest of the fair will anoint you in the aromatics. Then comes the invocation to Edith Branmar. And then...
Revered, stated Cudgel, allow me one boon. Before the ceremonies, begin to fit me with the magic cusps, so that I may understand the portent of the ceremony. The chief elder considered.
The request is unorthodox, but reasonable. Bring forth the cusps.
There was a wait, during which Cudgel stood first on one foot, then the other. The minutes dragged. The garments and the false beard itched intolerably, and now at the outskirts of the village he saw the approaching of several new figures, coming from the direction of Grod's. One was almost certainly Bubak Ung, while another seemed to have been shorn of his beard. Chief Elder appeared, holding in each hand a violet cusp.
Step forward.
Cudgel called loudly,
I am here, sir. Now apply the potion which sanctifies the junction of magic cusp to the right eye.
At the back of the crowd, Bubak Ong raised his voice.
Hold! What transpires?
Cudgel turned, pointing.
What jackal is this that interrupts the solemnities? Remove him, hence! Indeed, called the chief elder peremptorily. You demean yourself and the dignity of this ceremony.
Bubak Ong crouched back, momentarily cowed.
In view of the interruption, said Cudgel, I had as lief merely taken custody of the magic cusps until these louts can be properly chastened. No, said the chief elder, such a procedure is impossible.
He shook drops of rancid fat in Cudgel's right eye, but now the peasant of the shorn beard set out an outcry.
My hat! My blouse! My beard! Is there no justice? Silence, hissed the crowd. This is a solemn occasion. But I am
Cudgel called.
Insert the magic cusp, lord. Let us ignore these louts. A lout, you call me? Roared Bubak Ong. I recognize you now, rogue. Hold up proceedings.
The chief elder said inexorably.
I now invest upon you with the right cusp. You must temporarily hold this eye closed to prevent a discord which would strain the brain and cause stupor. Now the left eye.
He stepped forward with the ointment, but Bubak Ong and the beardless peasant no longer would be denied.
Hold up your proceedings, you noble impostor! I am Bubak Ong, the worthy squire, who stands before you is a vagabond.
The chief elder inspected Bubak Ong with puzzlement.
For a fact, you resemble that peasant for 31 years who has carted supplies to Smallod. But, if you are Bubak Ong, then who is this?
The beardless peasant lumbered forward.
It is the soulless wretch who stole the clothes from my back and the beard from my face. He is a criminal, a bandit, a vagabond. Hold, called the chief elder. The words are ill chosen. Remember that he has been exalted to the rank of Prince of Smallod. Not altogether, cried Bubak Ong. He has one of my eyes. I demand the other. An awkward situation, muttered the chief elder.
He spoke to Cudgel.
Though formerly a vagabond and a cutthroat, you are now a prince and a man of responsibility. What is your opinion?
I suggest a hiding for these obstreperous louts. Then Bubak Ong and the beardless peasant, uttering shouts of rage, sprang forward. Cudgel, leaping away, could not control his right eye. The lid flew open, and into his brain crashed such a wonder of exaltation that his breath caught in his throat, and his heart almost stopped from astonishment. But concurrently, his left eye showed the reality of Smallod. The dissonance was too wild to be tolerated. He stumbled back, and he fell against the hut. Bubak Ong stood over him, with mattock raised high. But now the chief elder stepped between.
Do you take leave of your senses? This man is a prince of Smallod, a man I will kill, for he has my eye. Do I toil 31 years for the benefit of a vagabond? Calm yourself, Bubak Ong, if that be your name. And remember, this issue is not yet entirely clear. Possibly, an error has been made. Undoubtedly, an honest error. For this man is now a prince of Smallod, which is to say, justice and sagacity personified. He was not that before he received the cusp, argued Bubak, which is when the offense was committed. I cannot occupy myself with caustic distinctions, replied the elder. In any event, your name heeds the list and the next fatality.
10 or 12 years hence? Cried Bubak Ong. Must I toil yet longer to receive my reward, just as the sun goes dark? No, this cannot be. The beardless peasant made a suggestion. Take the other cusp. This way you will at least have half of your rights, and so prevent the interloper from cheating you totally. Bubak Ong agreed. I will start with one magic cusp. Then I will kill the knave and take the other, and all will be well.
Now then, the chief elder said haughtily, this is hardly the tone to take in reference to a prince of Smallod. Bah!
Snorted Bubak Ong. Remember the source of your viands. We of the Grods will not toil to no avail.
Very well, said the chief elder. I deplore your uncouth bluster, but I cannot deny you that you have a measure of reason on your side. Here is the left cusp of Radkuth Varmin. I will dispense it with the invocation, anointment, and congratulatory paean. If you will be good enough to step forward and open your left eye. So.
As Cudgel had done, Bubak Ong looked through both eyes together and staggered back in a daze. But clapping his hand to his left eye, he recovered himself and advanced upon Cudgel. You must now see the futility of your trick. Extend me that cusp and go your way, for you will never have the use of the two. It matters very little, said Cudgel. Thanks to my friend Ferks, I am well content with the one. Bubak Ong ground his teeth. Do you think to trick me again? Your life has approached its end. Not just I, but all Grods goes warrant for this. Not in the precincts of Smallod, warned the chief elder.
There must be no quarrels among the princes. I decree amity. You, who have shared the cusps of Radguth Vaughman, must also share his palace, his robes, appurtenances, jewels, and retinue, until that hopefully remote occasion, when one or the other dies, whereon the survivor take all. This is my judgment. There is no more to be said.
The moment of the interloper's death is hopefully near at hand, rumbled Bubak Ong. The instant he sets foot from Smallod will be his last. The citizens of Grods will maintain a village of 100 years if necessary. Ferk squirmed at the news, and Cudgel winced in discomfort. In a conciliatory voice, he addressed Bubak Ong. A compromise might be arranged. To you shall go to the entirety of Radguth Vaughman's estate, his palace, his pertinences, retinue. To me shall devolve only the magic cusps. But Bubak Ong would have none of it. If you value your life, deliver that cusp to me this moment. This cannot be done, said Cudgel. Bubak Ong turned away and spoke to the beardless peasant, who nodded and departed. Bubak Ong glowered at Cudgel, then went to the Radguth Vaughman's hut and sat upon the heap of rubble before the door. Here, he experimented with his new cusp, cautiously closing his right eye and opening the left to stare in wonder at the overworld. Cudgel thought to take advantage of his absorption and sauntered off toward the edge of town. Bubak Ong appeared not to have noticed. Ha, thought Cudgel. It was so easy then. 2 more strides and he would be lost in the darkness. Jauntily, he stretched his long legs to take 2 of those strides. A slight sound, a grunt, a scrape, a rustle of clothes caused him to jerk aside. Down swung a mattock blade, cutting the air where his head had been. In the faint glow cast by small odd lamps, Cudgel glimpsed the beardless peasant's vindictive countenance. Behind him, Bubak Ong came loping, heavy head thrust forward like a bull. Cudgel dodged and ran with agility into the heart of Smallod. Slowly, and in vast disappointment, Bubak Ong returned to seat himself once more. You will never escape, he told Cudgel. Give over the cusp and preserve your life. By no means, replied Cudgel with spirit. Rather fear for your own sodden vitality, which goes in even greater peril. From the hut of the chief elder came an admonitory call.
Cease the bickering. I am indulging in the exotic whims of a beautiful princess, and must not be distracted.
Cudgel recalling the oleaginous wads of flesh, the leering slab-sided visages, the matted verminous hair, the waddles and wens of the evil odors which characterized the women of Smallod, marveled anew at the power of the cusps. Bubak Ong once more testing the vision of his left eye. Cudgel composed himself on a bench and attempted to use his right eye, first holding his hands before the left. Cudgel wore a shirt of supple silver scales, tight scarlet trousers, and a dark blue cloak. He sat on a marble bench before a row of spiral-made columns, overgrown with dark foliage and white flowers. To either side, the palaces of Smallod towered into the night, one behind the other, with soft lights ascenting the arches and windows. The sky was soft, dark blue, and hung with great glowing stars. Among the palaces were gardens of cypress, myrtle, jasmine, spade, thyme. The air was pervaded with the pure perfume of flowers and flowing water. From somewhere came a wisp of music, a murmur of soft chords, and a sigh of melody. Cudgel took a deep breath and rose to his feet. He stepped forward, moving across the terrace. Palaces and gardens shifted perspective. On a dim lawn, 3 girls in gowns of white gauze watched him over their shoulders. Cudgel took an involuntary step forward. Then, recalling the malice of Bubak Ong, paused to check on his whereabouts. Across the garden plaza rose a palace of 7 stories, each level with a terrace in its garden, with vines and flowers trailing down the walls. Through the windows, Cudgel glimpsed rich furnishings and lustrous chandeliers, soft movements of liveried chamberlains. On the pavilion before the palace stood a hawk-featured man with a cropped golden beard, in robes of ochre and black, with gold epaulets and black buskins. He stood with one foot on a stone griffin, arms on bent knee, gazing toward Cudgel, with an expression of brooding dislike. Cudgel marveled. Could this be the pig-faced Bubak Ong? Could the magnificent 7-tiered palace be the hovel of Radkuth Vaman? Cudgel moved slowly off across the palace, and now came upon a pavilion lit by a candelabra. Tables supported meats and jellies and pastries of every description, and Cudgel's belly, nourished only by driftwood and smoked fish, urged him forward. He passed from table to table, sampling morsels from every dish, and found all to be of the highest quality. Smoked fish and lentils I may be still devouring, Cudgel told himself, but there is much to be said for the enchantment by which they become such exquisite delicacies. Indeed, a man might do far worse than spend the rest of his life here in Smallod. Almost as if Ferks had been anticipating the thought, he instantly inflicted upon Cudgel's liver a series of agonizing pangs, and Cudgel bitterly reviled Eukonu the laughing magician, and repeated his vows of vengeance. Recovering his composure, he sauntered to that area where the formal gardens surrounding the palaces gave way to parkland. He looked over his shoulder to find the hawk-faced prince in ochre and black approaching, with manifestly hostile intent. In the dimness of the park, Cudgel noted the other movement and thought to spy a number of armored warriors. Cudgel returned to the plaza, and Bubak Ong followed once more to stand glowering at Cudgel in front of Radkuth Vaman's palace. "Clearly," said Cudgel aloud for the benefit of Ferks, "there will be no departure from Smallod tonight. Naturally, I am anxious to convey the cusp to Eukonu, but if I'm killed, then neither the cusp nor the admirable Ferks will ever return to Almery." Ferks made no further demonstration. Now, thought Cudgel, where to pass the night? The 7-tiered palace of Radkuth Vaman manifestly offered ample and spacious accommodation for both himself and Bubak Ong. In essence, however, the two would be crammed together into a one-roomed hut, with a single heap of damp reeds for a couch. Thoughtfully, regretfully, Cudgel closed his right eye and opened his left. Smallod was as before. The surly Bubak Ong crouched before the door to Radkuth Vaman's hut. Cudgel stepped forward and kicked Bubak Ong smartly. In surprise and shock, both Bubak Ong's eyes opened, and the rival impulses collided in his brain, induced paralysis. Back in the darkness, the beardless peasant roared and came charging forward, mattock on high, and Cudgel relinquished his plan to cut Bubak Ong's throat. He skipped inside the hut and closed and barred the door. Now, closed his left eye and opened his right. he found himself in a magnificent entry hall of Radkuthvaman's palace, the portico of which secured by a portcullis of forged iron. Without, the golden-haired prince in ochre and black, holding his hand over one eye, was lifting himself in cold dignity from the pavements of the plaza. Raising one arm in noble defiance, Bubak Ung swung his cloak over his shoulder and marched off to join his warriors. Cudgel sauntered through the palace, inspecting the appointments with pleasure. If it had not been for the importunities of Ferks, there would have been no haste in trying the perilous journey back to the Valley of Zan. Cudgel selected a luxurious chamber facing the south, doffed his rich garments for satin nightwear, settled upon a couch with sheets of pale blue silk, and instantly fell asleep. In the morning there was a degree of difficulty remembering which eye to open, and Cudgel thought that it might be well to fashion a patch to wear over the eye not currently in use. By day, the palaces of Smallod were more grand than ever, and now the plaza was thronged with princes and princesses, all of utmost beauty. Cudgel dressed himself in handsome garments of black with a jaunty green cap and green sandals. He descended to the entry hall, raised the portcullis with a gesture of command, and went forth into the plaza. There was no sign of Bubak Ung, and the other inhabitants of Smallod greeted him with courtesy, and the princesses displayed noticeable warmth, as if they found him of good address. Cudgel responded politely but without fervor. Not even the magic cusp could persuade him against the sour wads of fat, flesh, grime, and hair, which were the Smallod women. He breakfasted on delightful viands at the pavilion, then returned to the plaza to consider the next course of action. A cursory inspection of the parklands revealed Grodd's warriors on guard. There was no immediate prospect of escape. The nobility of Smallod applied themselves to their diversions. Some wandered the meadows, and others went boating upon the delightful waterways to the north. The chief elder, a prince of sagacious and noble visage, sat alone on an onk's bench, deep in reverie. Cudgel approached, and the chief elder aroused himself and gave Cudgel a salute of measured cordiality. "I am not easy in my mind," he declared, "in spite of all judiciousness, and allowing you for your unavoidable ignorance of our customs. I feel a certain inequity has been done, and I am at a loss for how to repair it." "It seems to me," said Cudgel, "that the squire Bubak Ong, though doubtless a worthy man, exhibits a lack of discipline unfitting the dignity of Smallod. In my opinion, he would be all better for a few more years seasoning as Grodd's." "There is something in what you say," replied the elder. "Small personal sacrifices are sometimes essential to the welfare of the group. I feel certain that you, if the issue arose, would gladly offer up your cusp and enroll anew at Grodd's. What are a few years? They flutter past like butterflies." Cudgel made a suave gesture. "Our trial by lot might be arranged, in which all who see with 2 cusps participate, the loser of the trial donating 1 of his cusps to Bubak Ung. I myself will make do with 1. The elder frowned. "Well, the contingency is remote. Meanwhile, you must participate in our merrymaking. If I may say so, you cut a personable figure, and certain of the princesses have been casting sheep's eyes in your direction. There, for instance, the lovely Udella, Narshag, and there, Zoxa of the rose petals, and beyond the vivacious Iluvio, Lasmal. You must not be backward here in Smallod. We live an uncircumscribed life. The charm of these ladies has not escaped me, said Cudgel. Unluckily, I am bound by a vow of continence. Unfortunate man, exclaimed the chief elder. The princesses of Smallod are nonpareil. And notice, yet another soliciting for your attention. Surely it is for you that she summons, said Cudgel, and the elder went to confer with the young woman in question, who had come riding into the plaza in a magnificent boat-shaped car, which walked on 6 swan feet. The princess reclined on a couch of pink down and was beautiful enough to make Cudgel rue the fastidiousness of his recollection, which projected every matted hair, mole, and dangling underlip, sweating seam, and wrinkle of the Smallod women to the front of his memory. This princess was indeed the essence of a daydream, slender and supple, with skin like still cream, and a delicate nose, lucent, brooding eyes, a mouth of delightful flexibility. Her expression intrigued Cudgel, for it was more complex than that of the other princesses, pensive yet willful, ardent yet dissatisfied. Into the plaza came Bubak Ong, accoutred in military wise, with corslet, morion, and sword. The chief elder went to speak to him, and now Cudgel's irritation, the princess, in walking boat, signaled to him. He went forward. Yes, princess, you have saluted me, I believe? The princess nodded. I speculate on your presence up here in these northern lands. She spoke in a soft, clear voice like music. Cudgel said, I am here on a mission. I stay but a short while at Smallod and then must continue east and south. Indeed, said the princess. What is the name of your mission? To be candid, I was brought here by the malice of a magician. It was by no means a yearning of my own. The princess laughed softly. I see few strangers. I longed for new faces and new talk. Perhaps you will come with me to my palace, and we'll talk of magic and the strange circumstances which throng the dying earth. Cudgel bowed stiffly. Your offer is kind, but you must seek elsewhere. I am bound to a vow of continence. Control your displeasure, for it applies not only to you, but to Adela Narshag yonder, Zor Oxa, and Illuvia Lasmal. The princess raised her eyebrows, sank back on her down-covered couch. She smiled faintly. Indeed, indeed. You are a harsh man, a stern, relentless man. Thus, to refuse yourself to so many imploring women. Where was I? This is the case, and so it must be. Cudgel turned away to face the chief elder, who approached with Bubak Ong at his back. Sorry circumstances, announced the chief elder in a troubled voice. Bubak Ong speaks for the village of Grods. He declares that no more victuals be furnished until justice is done. And this they define as the surrender of your cusp to Bubak Ong, and your person to a punitive committee who waits in the parkland yonder. Cudgel laughed uneasily. What a distorted view! You assured them, of course, that we of Smallod would eat grass and destroy the cusps before agreeing to such a detestable provisions. I fear that I temporized, stated the chief elder. I feel that the others of Smallod favor a more flexible course of action. The implication was clear, and Ferks began to stir in exasperation. In order to appraise the circumstances, the most fort-like manner possible, Cudgel shifted the patch to look from his left eye. Certain citizens of Grods, armed with scythes, mattocks, and clubs, waited at a distance of 50 yards. Evidently the punitive committee to which Bubok Ong had referred. To one side there were the huts of Smallod, to the other the walking boat, and the princess of such. Cudgel stared in astonishment. The boat was as before, walking on 6 bird legs, and sitting in pink down was the princess. If possible, more beautiful than ever, but now her expression, rather than faintly smiling, was cool and still. Cudgel drew a deep breath that took to his heels. Bubok Ong shouted in order to halt, but Cudgel paid no heed. Across the barrens he raced, with punitive committee in pursuit. Cudgel laughed gleefully. He was long of limb, sound of wind. The peasants were stumpy, not muscled, phlegmatic. He could easily run 2 miles to their one. He paused and turned to wave farewell. To his dismay, 2 legs from the walking boat detached themselves and leapt after him. Cudgel ran for his life in vain. The legs came bounding past, one on either side, and they swung around and kicked him to a halt. Cudgel sullenly walked back, the legs hopping behind. Just before he reached the outskirts of Smallod, he reached under the patch and pulled loose the magic cusp. As the punitive committee bore down on him, he held it aloft. "Stand back, or I break the cusp to fragments." "Hold! Hold!" called Bubok Ong. "This must not be. Come, give me the cusp, and accept your just deserts." "Nothing has been yet decided," Cudgel reminded him. "The chief elder has ruled it for no one." The girl rose from her seat in the boat. "I will rule." "Oh, hey, how's it going, DM Jeremy?" "Oh, the gang, what's goody?" "Hey, greetings." I'm getting to the end of the first chapter of Eyes of the Overworld. Hey, what's good? Where was I? The girl rose from her seat. "I will rule. I am..." Oh, hey, hello. First time chat viewer. We got the Vactor. Hey. Hello, hello. Artemis88. Hi, hi. Greetings. I'm reading Dying Earth right now. Cool thing about this one is it's about to be published as a Dungeon Crawl Classics setting. So I'm doing a little bit of reading. We're just at the end. Basically, this character Cudgel has this like weird magic sphere that he's holding up in the air. He's like he's gonna break it. And there's all this weird society that he's gotten wrapped up in. And there's this girl who's very pretty compared to the rest of these like weird villagers that live in this society. And she's speaking up. "I will rule. I am Derwi Korem, of the House of Domber. Give me the violet glass, whatever it is." "By no means," said Cudgel. "Take the cusp from Bubok Ong." "Never!" exclaimed the squire from Grods. "What? You both have a cusp, and both want too? What are these precious objects? You wear them as eyes. Give them to me." Cudgel drew his sword. "I prefer to run, but I will fight if I must." "I cannot run," said Bubok Ong. "I prefer to fight." He pulled the cusp from his own eye. "Now then, vagabond, prepare to die." "A moment," said Derwe Korem. From one of the legs of the boat, thin arms reached to seize the wrists of both Cudgel and Bubak. The cusps fell to earth. That of Bubak Ong struck a stone and shivered into fragments. He howled in anguish and leapt upon Cudgel, who gave ground before the attack. Bubak Ong knew nothing of swordplay. He hacked and slashed, as if he were cleaning a fish. The fury of his attack, however, was unsettling, and Cudgel was hard put to defend himself. In addition, Bubak Ong's sallies and slashes, Ferks was deploring the loss of the cusp. Derwe Cormi had lost interest in the affair. The boat started off across the barrens, moving faster and ever faster. Cudgel slashed out with his sword, leaping back, leapt back once more, and for the second time fled across the barrens, and the folk of Smallod and Grods shouted curses after him. The boat car jogged along at a leisurely rate, lungs throbbing. Cudgel gained upon it, and with a great bound leapt up and caught the downy gunwale and pulled himself astride. It was as he expected. Derwe Cormi had looked through the cusp and lay back in a daze. The violet cusp reposed in her lap. Cudgel seized it, then for a moment stared down into the exquisite face and wondered if he dared more. Ferks thought not. Already Derwe Corem was sighing and moving her head. Cudgel leapt from the boat, only just in time. Had she seen him? He ran to a clump of reeds, which grew by a pond, and flung himself into the water. From here he saw the walking boat halt, while Derwe Corem rose to her feet. She felt through the pink down for the cusp. She looked all around the countryside. But the blood-red light of the low sun was in her eyes, and she looked up toward Cudgel, and she saw only the reeds and the reflection of sun on water. Angry and sullen as never before, she set the boat into motion. It walked, then cantered, then lopped to the south. Cudgel emerged from the water, inspecting the magic cusp, tucked it into his pouch, and looked back toward Smallod. He started to walk south, then paused. He took the cusp from his pocket, closed his left eye, and held the cusp to his right. There rose the palaces, tier on tier, tower above the tower. The gardens hanging down the terrace. Cudgel would have stared a long time, but Ferks became restive. Cudgel returned the cusp to his pouch, and once again set his face to the south, for the long journey back to Almery. Alright, that was chapter 1 of Eyes of the Overworld. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. I think it's a fun little exploration there. I'm excited for the RPG to come out. Check it out. Dying Earth, Goodman Games, look it up. It's really worth checking out. Now, as for the music that we've been listening to, this is Lost Fellow. He's got some really good stuff on Bandcamp, so check him out. Lost Fellow. Age of Victory and Defeat, I believe, was the title of this album, if I remember correctly. So go check them out. Good stuff. And as for that, I hope you guys have a beautiful evening. It's been a pleasure. Night night.